I've been asked to come here today, and it's sort of quite a nice pleasure because I was in court this morning, and I'm having a really nice day, and this is just a continuation. You right now are at the centre of power in Britain. So behind us we've got the lower House of Commons, the upper House of Lords. Over there you've got the executive, you've got Whitehall. Over there you've got the Supreme Court, the top of the court system. And just there you've got Westminster Abbey, the spiritual head where we anoint our monarchs. And so you might think that you are in the middle of all that power. You're not. In this country, we have a long tradition of protest and expression and just doing stuff, because we're pretty bloody minded, really. If we don't like something, we just kick up a rock, you know. It's why they invented rugby. It was a way of having a fight and keeping it legal. Anyway, a couple of months ago, I went up there and I stood outside Downing Street with a load of reports and memory sticks and shit, and I said, excuse me, I've got lots of evidence that 3 cabinet ministers have committed the indictable offence of misconduct in a public office. And it was 2 years of work to get there. I could talk all about fracking and all their dodgy deals and all the different ways that they've broken the law, but that's boring. Yeah, that's just matter of fact. It's boring as hell. What I want to talk about is why I went there. And actually the why of going there has very little to do with the reason I was there. I've been an activist for over 30 years, hence the bald head and the grey hair. In the early 1980s, I was a peace campaigner. I was going to peace camps, jumping up and down outside bases with nuclear weapons. And I met a man called John Bugg. He died in 1993, but he was a Ministry of Defence policeman. He was policing bases. And in the end, meeting so many peace campaigners got to him, and he retired as a policeman and became a peace campaigner. But unlike every other peace campaigner, he used the law. He would challenge them using their own rules. And as a teenager, I hung around him and just learnt. And all my campaigning career, I've always used our system of law to campaign against them. It's an Olinskian thing. No bureaucracy can meet its own set of rules because it wouldn't work. They rely on breaking the rules in order to make everything work every day. Now, that tradition isn't just something recent. It goes back all the way, funny enough, to the Norman Conquest. Because when the Normans came over in 1066, they conquered one of the most well-run states in Europe at that time. The British bureaucracy, the Saxon bureaucracy, was emblematic of organisation across Europe. And so they kept the bureaucracy. And there's a David Graeber book come out recently, The Utopia of Rules, and in there he talks about all the people who really wanted to take over a country. They killed the bureaucracy first, because otherwise they couldn't control it. And so the Normans never really controlled Britain. The bureaucracy controlled Britain. And so this starts coming to a head about the 1200s. You get Robin Hood, you get various minor Saxon people who are now getting a bit umbrage with the Norman takeover. Winston Churchill, on the plinth over there, he wrote a book called The History of the English-Speaking Peoples, and he goes into the whole history of this country. And in the Saxon times, he's quite enthusiastic about Britain. I'm not. I've got a voice.
Just let's get on with it. It's a democratic gathering. Carry on, mate.
It's okay, I don't need amplification. I do this a lot.
Louder, the projection.
Right. Where was I? Saxons, right. So we have the Normans coming along, taking over, and then in 1135 we have what's called the anarchy. And Winston Churchill was quite poetic about the anarchy. He talks about the Norman warlords going around and literally raping the land to get all the money they could. And that stokes up umbrage. And it gets worse and worse until Peasants' Revolt, 1381. But the Peasants' Revolt is not simply about feudalism. It's about free expression.
So it's 1066 and then onwards, what they call it, the Anarchy?
The Anarchy, 1135. It was when there was that argument, it was William the Conqueror's grandchildren arguing about who should be in charge. And the place was run by warlords.
The harrying of the North, somebody mentioned the other day.
That was in 1080, where
they massacred 100,000 people up around Yorkshire.
It's 40,000. At the time, it was equivalent about 20% of the population they killed. Massive. So, the Peasants' Revolt was not just about being feudal. It was about basic self-expression. And at the time, you had John Whitcliffe, who had just translated the Bible into English. Now, you may be spiritual, you may be not. But in the England of this time, the Bible was the equivalent of an economics textbook. Just as economics is our secular religion today, the Bible was the book of law in England at that time. And you have to look at it like that to understand how people were looking at it. It governed every aspect of society. And so by translating the Bible into English so that ordinary people could understand it, John Whitcliffe took away the power of the church over there and the state over here. Because once people could freely interpret for themselves, they looked at what Jesus said and they went, they've been lying to us. Hang on, he's saying that these rich people are bad. He's saying that the poor are the people who are going to inherit the earth. So they take umbrage, and everybody talks about Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt. The biggest figure in the Peasants' Revolt is a man called John Ball. We don't talk about him nearly enough. John Ball was what they call a hedge preacher. He had tried to be an ordained minister in the church, the Catholic Church at the time, and he was kicked out for being too radical, for actually taking it seriously, believing what the Bible said. So he became what they called a hedge preacher. He would go around preaching in places like this, doing what I'm doing now, bringing the word of the gospel to people and empowering them. And so they burned him and tortured him and done various nasty things. John Whitcliffe, who translated the Bible into English, he died in 1381.
Who are you talking about?
John Whitcliffe. John Ball.
John Ball.
John Whitcliffe, he translated the Bible, he died in 1381. 20 years later, the Catholic Church was so pissed off, they dug up his bones and burnt them. Because he wasn't going to escape justice, that he said. But anyway, John Ball, he said things like, when Adam delved and Eve span, who was the gentleman? He talked about, hang on, the Bible does not appoint people in charge. In the Bible, everyone is equal. If you read Acts chapter 2, after Jesus is taking up whatever, all the apostles, they get together, they put all their goods collectively in one pot and live as a commune. And that was Christianity until the Romans sort of politicised it and took over and made it a bit sort of, a bit more glossy. But in the background, there's this huge oppression from the state to keep the English Bible down. And this group sets up called the Lollards. And they are people going around secretly giving out copies of the Bible in English. And people are reading this and it's politicising it. The Lollards. Lollards. It's from a courtly French term, meaning person who mumbles rubbish. And the Lollards went around. Now, we talk about Protestantism, starting with Martin Luther in 1517 when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the cathedral. No, the Lollards nailed their 12 principles to the door of Westminster Abbey in 1417, well before what happened in Germany, Martin Luther. So, fast forward a bit more. There is this whole underground politicisation, education going on in medieval England, and it's hardly recorded. Churchill mentions it a bit in the history of the English-speaking peoples, because what they were forming in corners, not reflected or even seen by the state, was the core of what we consider democracy. And that really bubbles up in the Civil War. Now, if you go down the river to Putney, the St Mary's Putney by the bridge, go into St Mary's Putney.
All right, you recognise me.
Nice cafe, bit expensive. Go into the church, there is an exhibition about the levellers. And on the wall in Putney Church there is a bit of a speech by Colonel Thomas Rainsborough. The smallest he in this kingdom has a life as great as the greatest he. In 1647, in between the two civil wars, the ordinary political they were called adjutants. They were the people in the Cromwell's New Model Army who were a bit like the commissars in the Red Army. You know, they kept the political line, and they debated the first time in Europe that the people who were being governed debated the terms of their governance with their masters. And they had this 3 weeks at Putney, St Mary's Putney, debating this. And then a couple of years later, Cromwell put them in prison, chopped off their heads, killed them in various different ways. The levellers were into things like one person, one vote, fixed term parliaments of 2 years, and the complete rule of law, every person having equal representation under the law, stuff that we completely take for granted now. They were openly debating as ordinary, common people in the 1630s, 1640s. And that was a huge part of the Civil War that is not taught in our schools. You know, what we teach about a Civil War, we had a king, he was a bit of a bastard, we chopped off his head, and then these people took over. And a lot of the problems we have today start in January 1649 at that point. Because Charles took the view that he had the divine right of a king. And when they chopped off Charles's head, that place took the divine right of the king. And today it's called the royal prerogative. And the Prime Minister has the royal prerogative. It gives him all sorts of rules which are directly inherited from the divine power of the king. We don't have a king who is in charge anymore. The Prime Minister is in charge and the monarch is just the head of state. But the Prime Minister has a position which is equivalent to the medieval king. They have a divine right to rule over us. And we haven't got beyond that. We are no further forward now than the Putney debates of 1647. And we don't educate people about those debates. If people actually read them, they would go, well, hang on, all the shit that's been around this election about politics, you know, we all have the right to vote. It's very important that we have the right to vote, that we all vote. I went down the polling station this morning, got my piece of paper, and then went, peak oil is here and none of you get it. Because we have the right to vote, we have nothing to vote for. And that is the major dysfunction. And that is no different to the situation 350 odd years ago.
Not everyone has the right to vote. If you're homeless, if you're travellers, a lot of different people, mentally ill, there's a massive amount of people who don't actually have that opportunity.
True.
My friend is one.
But let's go forward again. I mean, I'm trying to condense what I could do in 2 hours into half an hour, and then we'll have a chat. Let's jump forward to Chartism. Chartism was the first time we've had medieval peasants. Feudalism goes, we get the agricultural revolution, and with agricultural revolution 1600s you get land enclosure. Being a peasant, you had to work perhaps on average 1 or 2 hours per week for your lord. It wasn't a lot. Most of your time was your own. You were self-sufficient. You had land available to you to be self-sufficient. The agricultural revolution clears people from the land. Although you had poor people, you had destitute people in medieval England, everybody was somehow supported, mainly through the church. With land enclosure, people driven off the land, we have this new idea of poverty, of the poor. And the first poor law comes in 1603 because for the last 50 years they've been kicking people off the land, and now these people exist. And then that really takes off after the Civil War. The Civil War transferred power from one person to a group of about 200 big landowners in Britain, most of whom were just continuations of what the Normans started. So So we have the Industrial Revolution and Agricultural Revolution combine and relocate people from the fields to the very first industrial towns. For the first 50 years of its existence, Manchester killed more people than it were born there. It was gruesome. Manchester was a charnel house for the landless poor. From about 1780, 1820, it killed more people than were created in Manchester. Because of the conditions there, they were awful. And by about 1830, people are getting majorly pissed off. So on one side we've got the Chartists. The Chartists, again, it's almost identical to the Levellers. One man, unfortunately, one vote, fixed-term parliaments and accountability for public officials. And the government responds with the Great Reform Act in 1832. That is when this place became as we see it today. And all the anachronisms we have today, all those city rules, processes they have in there, they started in 1832. And again, it was a smokescreen. It was a reorganisation that got rid of the really heinous things like rotten boroughs where you could buy a parliamentary seat if you fancied a job in Parliament. But mainly it was a smokescreen to allow the rich to continue doing what they were doing. And the next big challenge didn't really come until the beginning of the 20th century with the Labour Party. The Labour Party really did challenge that whole establishment because for the first time you had more and more people were having the vote. Now the weird thing is, the only election in Britain where we had a majority of the people, of all the people, women included on the same basis of men, elected a parliament which reflected a majority view was 1935. Before that, not everybody had the vote on an equal basis. But after 1935, every single government that's been elected has been elected on a minority of all the people who can vote. David Cameron at the last election got 24% of the people who could vote voting for him. It's a minority administration. It's not just first past the post. It's the fact that these people don't actually represent anything that matters in people's lives today. Yes, we can go and vote, but what we're voting for, neoliberalism, free markets, zero-hours contracts, it does bugger all for us. I'm sorry, but they are not talking the language which meets what we want. Take a parallel strand. In the mid-1800s, mid-19th century, you've got various forms of anarchism emerging. Now, anarchism had always been there. Anarchism was a big thing in Saxon England, within the Leveller ideas, within the Chartist ideas, but around the 1840s, 1850, you've got people like Henry David Thoreau in America, or Tolstoy in Russia, advocating communal solutions. That if you really want representative government, it has to be direct administration, direct from the people deciding. In a lot of weird ways, capitalism is anarchism. They don't like external regulation. They don't like being told what to do. The difference is, capitalism seeks to concentrate power, influence and wealth amongst the minority. Anarchism seeks to distribute that. And that fundamental contradiction is at the heart of a whole lot of problems we have in politics today. So we get Thoreau coming along with civil disobedience. 1854 saying any law that is not moral, you should not obey it. A moral law, by all means do. But if your conscience basically says no, you don't do it. And that was happening a lot. It reached its zenith with Gandhi, and the idea of Satyagraha. We have this idea of passive resistance. We all go out, we sit there, we get hit, we get beaten up. Well, yeah, that's passive resistance. Satyagraha, the ideas that Gandhi were promoting, are not passive resistance. The literal translation of Satyagraha is truth force. The idea that when you take action, you have to expose the truth of the thing that you are taking action against within its own terms. That's what brought down English administration in India. And for a while, with the peace movement in the 80s, with a lot of political and anarchist movements in Britain in the 60s and 70s, we were doing that. What's really, for me, as somebody who's been through this process, what's really killed activism in Britain today is the iPhone, is the internet. It's this whole idea of lifestyle politics, that you are what you consume. And in the end, if you go back and look at that heritage of dissent, of action in Britain, it's not about identifying yourself for what it is or what you say. It's about personal self-expression. It's about creating a set of social relations around you that are meaningful. And what modern consumerism is doing, it's directly antithetical to that. It's basically saying you are what you consume. It's fundamentally corrosive to human relationships. And I spent the 90s running around Britain working for community groups who were getting incinerators, landfills, chemical plants, all sorts of crap dumped on them. And I had a big falling out with some of the big campaign groups, and I won't go there, bad karma. But they took all my work away. Literally the week later, I got a phone call from Open Society Institute. Would I go to Eastern Europe and work with journalists and human rights workers in former Soviet states? And I had 3 beautiful years helping people who really were in it. Who, I was teaching them to communicate using the internet 2000, 2001. A long way before Anonymous, I was doing what Anonymous was doing. The final communique at the Seattle conference in 1999, they couldn't issue it online because I helped organise a global protest which was legally. I like to do things legally, it annoys them all. Legally took down their web server. But working with people who really were, if you said something wrong in Belarus or Zimbabwe, they would beat the crap out of you. It's a bit of a different situation. I'm from...
So as in England, he beat the crap up to you in England as well.
Not like Belarus. You have to be there to appreciate it.
Not by default. There or here. It's the same.
So
let's acknowledge that as well, please. I'm a victim of that. Yeah. I've been kicked really must. Just for asking the bailiff to stop harassing other people.
In Belarus, they boil their journalists alive. Slight difference.
Another journalist.
Yeah. But what I realised was, in this country, we are being channeled into processes of distraction. A lot of online action is distraction. You sit at home, you click a few things, you feel that you've done something. But it doesn't really change anything because you're not concentrating on those basic social relations. We have 800 years of heritage where people have got together to change their social circumstances, their relationships with each other. When the National Health Service was created in 1948, it did not just spring fully formed. More than 2/3 of what the National Health Service inherited in 1948 already existed. The hospitals, the schools, they were run by friendly societies, they were run by mutual societies, by charities, and what the government are now selling off is what this country created out of people's own pockets for each other. And that, if we are going forward from now, is what we have to focus on. These people here are not only illegitimate, but what they are doing is directly opposite to our own social, personal interests.
You say they're illegitimate. Can you just define that in a few sentences? Why do you say they're illegitimate?
A majority of the people don't elect them.
I agree with it, yeah.
But the fundamental basis of legitimacy in a democracy, you have majority support. Majority support is not who turns out to vote. Because if you feel, honestly, like I do, I have nothing to vote for. I have to vote. But I usually go down and write some inspirational comment on my ballot paper because I have nothing to vote for that actually addresses anything that I care about. And that's what we have to work on. And it begins by holding these people to account. That is why, after 2 years of work, on March the 5th, I went to Downing Street and said, excuse me, Mr. Policeman on the gate, here's all my evidence. They are breaking the law. They are committing misconduct in a public office. They are breaking the ministerial code. They are breaking various civil service codes. Please go and arrest them for me. And they said, not my problem. Now the thing is, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, what it says is, the state in this country has a monopoly on violence. So ordinary citizens do not have an automatic right to go and arrest somebody. This is the problem about arresting Blair. You know, there are only certain things you can arrest people for. Now, if it's an indictable offence, then you have the power of citizen's arrest. Misconduct in a public office is an indictable offence. It has to go to a Crown Court. You get more than £50,000. You get £50,000 fine or life in prison.
It's a high level offence.
High level offence. So I said, well, are you refusing? If you watch the video, if you go to YouTube, put in arrest the cabinet, you can see the very, very silly video. I said, are you refusing to take my complaint? Are you refusing to enforce the law? And they said yes, which is brilliant, because the moment they did that, they gave me the right to do it myself. At which point I said, can I come in? And they said no. But I stayed there, and after lots of discussions, after lots of policemen turning up to talk to me, they're still refusing to do it. I stopped official looking cars going in and out because I want to search them. I want to look for these people. If I can't come in, then I'm going to make sure they're not going past this gate. I'm going to search all the official cars, at which point they carted me off to Charing Cross Nick. But I'm really annoyed in one way, because I've been doing this for 30 years. At the beginning I talked about John Bugg, the military policeman who got a conscience and jumped the fence. Not quite literally, but he went around the gateway. And in all those 30 years of doing this, I still haven't been charged. If you use the system, I know it's a chore. It means sitting down a lot of evenings, reading some books, finding out how these people work. The thing is, if you want to help somebody who needs benefits, you have to study the benefits system. If you want to help somebody who needs help with the Mental Health Act, you have to study mental health systems. Being a protester, it is a craft. It is not something you just go to AVAS and put your name in. It's a craft, it requires study and effort. And the more effort you put in, the more you get back. And the thing I can honestly say, doing this for 30 years, if you treat it as a method of personal growth, I'm not just angry at these people. The reason I am doing this to them is that 800 years of tradition. It's that 800 years of, sorry, I'm not going to take this. You are not legitimate. You cannot tell me to do that. Because we are all, it's getting a bit Python-esque, we are all individuals. Yeah, nobody said it. And we all matter. I would have to say, I think the policemen matter as much. And if you look at the day, I'm in no way provocative, I'm not angry, I'm really fluffy the whole day, because actually policemen are trained to respond to violence. They're trained to respond to tension and anger. If you don't do that, the moment you are there, you are fluffy, you are nice, you are courteous, you actually disempower the police, because they don't know how to treat you. And the moment they do start treating you over the top, well, actually they're in the wrong, because if you're not being angry, if you're not provoking, then they can't just deal with you as they want to, because the rules technically, I have to use the word technically, don't allow it.